if I told you that millions of young Americans are living in poverty, but their struggles are being kept out of the American mainstream? The problem of these kids being kept out of the mainstream, living in the shadows of our nation, is ongoing and growing. The group of these young Americans has now grown to 5.5 million, which is a larger group than before the recession. It is important that America and its citizens take action sooner rather than later. Although the editorial, The Cost of Letting Young People Drift, tackles and explores many important issues, it occasionally fails to go far enough into depth about the American epidemic plaguing the young people of our nation. I will be discussing 3 areas that I believe deserved more attention in the scope of the editorial. The first point that deserves more attention falls when the writer suggests that bridging the gap between the kids living in the mainstream and the kids living in the shadows of our nation should be left to the government. I think the government should play a hefty role, but the editorial fails to explain the importance of the nonprofit sector when it comes to guiding these at-risk kids. Nonprofit and philanthropic organizations can and should play a major, lasting role in the development of these kids. According to Becky Cooper, in building a learning community through the power of mentoring relationships, kids grow from close connections with mentors, and these mentorships are pivotal for future success for these kids. She states, relationships, connections, engagement, and participation are key elements to successful learning. The second point that needs a more in-depth analysis comes when the editorial's author mentions that kids living in the shadows of the mainstream are damaging to the rest of society. This editorial includes the point, but it never really fully explains it. The damaging effects of these conditions in relation to the affected children are explored, but an analysis of the effects on the rest of the nation is completely absent. According to Lackand, Eddy, and Zell, and Mentoring Youth at High Risk, the perspectives of professional mentors, these at-risk kids rely on a few things above all else. 1, multifaceted organizational support. 2, community for the youth to fall back on. And 3, an individualized child focus. And finally, the third point that needs more content behind it comes when it is written in the editorial that these segregated neighborhoods and the people who populate them are much worse off. Although this appears to be a fact, no answer is ever found for how to solve the problem. One answer could be lurking on the outskirts of the editorial, and that is providing young people with opportunities. Children benefit from apprenticeships and mentorships and having role models. Jean Rhodes, in her book, Stand By Me, The Risks and Rewards of Mentoring Today's Youth, says, mentoring is a modestly effective intervention for youth who are already coping relatively well under somewhat difficult circumstances. This says that kids are more resilient than we believe them to be, and sometimes, rather than needing complete change from their daily lives, they just need support and a friend. Since the guidance of the youth is such a significant problem across the nation, it is hard to find answers to all questions, and it is equally difficult to fully explain many critical factors of the problem. The editorial introduced this problem that America is experiencing, but it often failed to go in depth enough to fully explain all the information necessary. The editorial undermined the importance of the nonprofit organizations when it comes to uniting American youth with the mainstream. It also failed to explain the damaging effects that letting the youth drift has on these vulnerable kids. And finally, the editorial does not provide any possible solution for bettering the children who are living in poorer circumstances than those in the mainstream. So, working to solve this problem is not only a job for the government or for the philanthropic sector, but for America as a whole. America and its citizens must work to become one united village of support and positivity to benefit the future generations. Because as we all know, the old cliche says, it takes a village to raise a child. And in America, that cliche reigns true.